This is a franchise that badly, badly needs bigs. And my God, if they have not gone out here and signed another guard. Hell, I'm out here telling people, yeah, we probably can't sign Kate Martin because we got too many guards. Shit, you made all of us look like fools. You went and signed another guard anyway, and it wasn't Kate Martin.
When a 91-year-old owner needs to hear from angry fans on YouTube, you know something's gone catastrophically wrong. And what we're watching unfold in Indiana isn't just bad decision-making. It's a systematic dismantling of the most lethal offensive weapon the WNBA has seen in years. The Fever just signed their final developmental contract player. Take a guess what position they filled. Go ahead, I'll wait. Another guard. They signed another guard.
I don't... What the F? You signed another guard to the same contract the Sparks gave Kate Martin. I mean, honestly, we signed our final developmental player. Yeah, go on. Another guard. People, F it. I mean, what are we doing? Are you kidding? Another guard. Please tell me this is a joke. How are we supposed to take this franchise serious? We need rim.
Let's establish the facts here. The Indiana Fever's biggest weakness throughout the 2024 season was interior defense and rebounding. They got dominated in the paint game after game. Aaliyah Boston, despite being an elite talent, was constantly fighting alone down low. The solution to this problem, according to the Fever front office, it's adding Bry Hall to a developmental contract, a guard. Their roster now has more guards than a maximum security prison. Meanwhile, Kate Martin signed the exact same type of developmental deal with the Las Vegas Aces. The Fever could have brought in a player with legitimate size, defensive versatility, and an existing connection to Caitlin Clark. Instead, they went shopping in the one position where they're already overstocked.
Arsenal was the pick and roll game between Caitlin Clark and Aaliyah Boston. You heard me say it. Stockton and Malone style. Stephanie White even said Stockton and Malone style. Before she even got hired, I was talking about John Stockton to feeding Karl Malone, and it was deadly. Nobody could stop it. And there has not been a damn thing that showed any team in this league could stop Caitlin Clark feeding Aaliyah Boston.
But the roster construction disaster is only half the story. Because what Stephanie White has done to the Fever's offensive system is even more baffling. Last season, Christy Sides ran a simple but devastatingly effective play, the Caitlin Clark to Aaliyah Boston pick and roll. Defenses had no answer for it. Clark's court vision combined with Boston's finishing ability created one of the highest percentage plays in the league. 14 games into White's tenure as head coach, that play has essentially been removed from the playbook. In their recent loss to an inferior team at home, they ran it twice. Twice in an entire game. The one thing that was working, the one offensive set that no team had figured out how to stop consistently, has been abandoned.
I've watched a lot of Aaliyah Boston and Unrivaled even coming into this, and she is such a powerhouse that I think, I know she's going to be happy to have Caitlin back because that was one of the high targets in the league of that two-man game. So what does that look like now? Even Raven moving Caitlin off the ball, having a two-man game with Aaliyah Boston, you have a lot of weapons, and people sometimes don't realize, that's when, the coaches now, it's your job to mesh that whole thing together and make it work.
Yeah, I think creating space for C and AB to do what they do in the two-man game, you probably aren't going to see it necessarily on the first side of the floor anymore. Everybody's game plan is ready for that. I think playing through AB as a hub and inverting some of those actions. I mean, she showed last year that she can be a point forward, so to speak. I mean,
You literally 14 games. The whole league's ready for that. No, they're not. Stop it. Christ.
She handled a lot of our ball handling duties with Caitlin off the floor. We want to play through her. We want those two to be able to play off.
Now listen to what Stephanie White said before the season even started. She literally name-dropped John Stockton and Karl Malone. She talked about how Caitlin and Aaliyah were going to develop into the greatest point guard post player combination in league history. She sold that vision to the media, to the fans, to everyone watching. Fast forward to February 2025, and she's telling us a completely different story. Suddenly, the two-man game isn't going to be featured on the first side of the floor anymore because everybody's game plan is ready for that. After 14 games, and apparently the entire league has solved it. That's not coaching, that's capitulation. You don't abandon your most effective offensive weapon because teams are ready for it. The Stockton-Malone pick-and-roll ran for 15 years. Every team in the NBA knew it was coming. They still couldn't stop it consistently.
Of one another, but we also got to create space for Kelsey Mitchell. I mean, Kelsey Mitchell is an elite guard who can get her shot off at any time, who can get downhill, who can create matchup problems, who can create rotations to allow Aaliyah and Caitlin's job to be.
To that point, I've watched.
Not only that, but by all means, send your coach in to do an interview with one of the biggest Caitlin Clark haters on the planet. I'm gonna use a word you don't hear very often anymore. Cahoots. Are you motherfuckers all in cahoots together? Y'all got that CBA and said, nah, we're good. We got it now. I hate to break it to you. The one thing you better be concerned about is that media rights deal.
And here's where the explanation falls apart completely. White says they need to create space for Kelsey Mitchell, that she's an elite guard who can get her shot off at any time. Nobody's disputing Kelsey Mitchell's talent. She's one of the best scorers in the WNBA. But when did this become Kelsey Mitchell's team? When did the offensive hierarchy shift so dramatically that Caitlin Clark, the player who brought unprecedented attention and revenue to this franchise, is now running off ball sets? Watch that interview again. White talks about Aaliyah Boston being a hub, about inverting actions, about creating rotations. What she doesn't talk about is maximizing Caitlin Clark's unique abilities. The player who led the league in assists as a rookie. The player who can run an offense at a level this league has never seen before.
You've abandoned something else that worked. Well, I guess you probably did because that's the only way your girl Kelsey Mitchell is going to get off. Again, I'm not trying to hate on Kelsey Mitchell. I'm not. This got nothing to do with her. Dynamic scorer, one of the best dynamic scorers in the league, not named Kennedy Carter. But exactly in what pecking order is Caitlin Clark now? Is she third? Shit, before we know it, Caitlin Clark's going to be coming off the bench as a sixth man because I'm starting to wonder.
There's another element to this story that can't be ignored. Caitlin Clark is dealing with injuries. A back issue, a hip flexor problem, a groin strain. These aren't minor tweaks. These are interconnected soft tissue injuries that suggest something more serious might be going on. And the Fever's response has been to talk about going into the blue tent and managing her minutes. Here's the question nobody's asking. Was the back injured last year and everything else is compensating? Or did the hip flexor and groin issues cause the back injury? Because those injury patterns don't just happen randomly. They're connected. And if Caitlin Clark has been playing through a significant injury that hasn't been properly addressed, that's a medical staff failure of catastrophic proportions. You don't implement dramatic offensive changes and reduce a player's role unless there's a serious underlying issue. And if that issue exists, the Fever owes it to their fans and to Caitlin to be transparent about it.
Because there are ways that networks can go back to leagues and say, we're not getting what we signed up for. Uh-oh. And then they got to start giving, oh shit, you're not delivering the ratings we were hoping to get. Because the advertisers are going to be like, these aren't the ratings we signed up for. Well, no shit. You got Caitlin Clark playing off the ball and a third of the people's tuning in. By the way, there were empty seats at that game. People were not willing to pay up to resellers to buy those tickets. This was Stephanie White when she got hired.
Anticipate what one another was going to do, how they facilitated with one another. But there's so much room for growth. You know, and when you think about a Stockton and Malone, right? You think, I know you guys are too young for that reference.
Let's talk about who Stephanie White chose to do this interview with. Not a neutral reporter, not a mainstream media outlet. She sat down with one of the most vocal Caitlin Clark critics in the WNBA media landscape. That's not an accident, that's a calculated decision. And it raises an uncomfortable question. Is the Fever front office actively trying to appease the faction of WNBA fans and media who resent Caitlin Clark's popularity? Because every major decision they've made this offseason points in that direction. They hired a coach who immediately changed the offensive system that made Clark most effective. They've signed players to fill positions where they're already deep, instead of addressing glaring weaknesses. They've done interviews with media personalities who have built their platforms on criticizing Clark. At what point does coincidence become pattern? At what point do we acknowledge that something else is going on here?
But when you think about the great point guards and post players that our game, not just our league, but our game has seen, they are going to go down in history as the greatest. And I'm excited about the anticipate what.
Okay. You said it. I didn't. Well, technically I did before you ever came along, but you're a used car salesman. You're a fucking ambulance chaser. You're the worst of the... I mean, what are we doing? Bogus bill of goods. I mean, did they send you in undercover to try to kill her career at this point? I mean, all this conspiracy stuff, remember how many conspiracies have turned out to be real? That everybody thought everybody was crazy? What is happening here?
The attendance numbers from their recent home loss tell a story the front office doesn't want to hear. There were empty seats. In a building that was selling out last season, that was creating a wait list for season tickets, there were visible empty seats. Resellers couldn't move their inventory at any price. And the television ratings, they're down significantly from last season's peaks. The advertisers who paid premium rates for WNBA broadcasts based on the Caitlin Clark effect are looking at the actual numbers and asking questions. The networks who signed that massive media rights deal are starting to do the math. Here's something most fans don't understand about media rights contracts. They have performance clauses. If the league doesn't deliver the viewership numbers that were projected, the networks can renegotiate. They can claw back money. And when that happens, it doesn't just affect the current CBA. It affects future negotiations, expansion plans, everything.
Your team, you just dropped it. Yes, they're an inferior team. Oh, well, they hit a bunch of open shots. No shit. Because your defensive guru couldn't come up with a plan. So they got open shots. That's the Fever's fault. Them getting an open shot is yeah. Lack of length. Oh my God. Let's sign another guard. Oh, they're stopping the Stockton Malone game. They didn't even touch it and you took it away. Ain't no way. And you got people out there trying to convince, oh, she's such a good coach. Okay. Agenda. Everybody's got agenda. Tell me what you think. Peace.
Go back and watch Stephanie White's hiring press conference. Listen to what she says about Caitlin and Aaliyah. She specifically mentions Stockton and Malone. She talks about them becoming the greatest duo in the history of the game. She sells this vision with complete confidence. Now she's telling us that vision is dead after 14 games. That's not adjusting to what defenses are doing. That's a complete philosophical reversal. And it happens so quickly that it suggests this was always the plan. The press conference was a sales pitch. The reality is something entirely different. You don't go from they're going to be Stockton and Malone to you probably won't see that on the first side of the floor anymore, unless you never believed it in the first place. Unless the entire thing was just telling people what they wanted to hear to get the job.
You got to do something about the leadership with the Indiana Fever, the front office, and one Stephanie White. I don't know what this franchise is doing.
Here's what makes this entire situation so frustrating. Herb Simon, the Pacers and Fever owner, is 91 years old. He's not running day-to-day operations. Whoever is making these basketball decisions on his behalf is systematically destroying the value of the most marketable asset the franchise has ever had. Any competent owner would look at what Caitlin Clark represents financially and build everything around maximizing that value. You'd fire anyone who threatened it. You'd scorch earth before you'd let that marketing juggernaut walk away to another franchise. The revenue she generates, the attention she brings, the merchandise sales, the ticket demand, it's unprecedented in WNBA history. Instead, the Fever are treating her like a role player who needs to adapt to everyone else's game. They're making roster decisions that make no strategic sense. They're implementing an offensive system that minimizes her greatest strengths. So let's break down exactly what's happened here, and why it matters for the future of this franchise and potentially the league itself. The Indiana Fever had a clear blueprint for success. Caitlin Clark running the offense, Aaliyah Boston as her primary pick-and-roll partner, and complementary pieces around them. That system took them to the playoffs in Clark's rookie season, despite significant roster limitations and coaching issues. The foundation was there, the chemistry was developing, the results were improving. Then they hired Stephanie White, and everything changed. Not gradually, not through a natural evolution of the offense. Immediately, and dramatically, the pick-and-roll game that defined their success got shelved. Clark's usage shifted, the offensive hierarchy became unclear, and the explanations for these changes don't hold up under scrutiny. White claims defenses adapted to the Clark-Boston two-man game, but 14 games is not enough time to make that determination. Successful offensive systems in basketball run for years, not weeks. Teams knew the Stockton-Malone pick-and-roll was coming every single time down the floor. They still couldn't stop it consistently because the execution was elite and the talent was undeniable. Clark and Boston have that same potential. The real issue isn't that defenses solve the pick-and-roll. The real issue is that running that play consistently means Kelsey Mitchell becomes the third option. And everything the Fever have done suggests they're not willing to establish that hierarchy. They want Mitchell to maintain her scoring role, which requires Clark to play off the ball more. That's a choice. A deliberate choice that prioritizes one player's comfort over the team's most effective offensive strategy. Now let's address the roster construction disaster. The Fever's biggest weakness is interior defense and rebounding. This isn't debatable. It's obvious to anyone who watched them play last season. They got dominated in the paint repeatedly. Aaliyah Boston is an excellent player, but she can't defend the rim and protect the glass by herself against teams with legitimate size. The solution to this problem is not complicated. You need to add size, you need rim protection, you need rebounding. These are the most fundamental roster-building principles in basketball. Yet the Fever's response has been to sign guards, multiple guards. They just used their final developmental contract spot on another guard. Kate Martin, who has legitimate size at 6 foot, defensive versatility, and an existing chemistry with Caitlin Clark from their Iowa days, signed the exact same type of contract with Las Vegas. The Fever could have made that move. They chose not to. Instead, they added Bry Hall, a talented player who does nothing to address their actual needs. This isn't just a questionable decision. This is organizational malpractice. This is either complete incompetence or a deliberate strategy to avoid surrounding Clark with the pieces that would maximize her impact. And given everything else that's happened, incompetence alone doesn't explain it. The injury situation adds another layer of concern. Caitlin Clark is dealing with back, hip flexor, and groin issues. These aren't isolated problems. They're interconnected. Soft tissue injuries in that chain suggest either a compensating pattern from an initial injury or a biomechanical issue that hasn't been properly addressed. Either way, it's serious. And the Fever's response has been to reduce her role rather than address the underlying problem. They're talking about load management and going into the blue tent instead of being transparent about what's actually wrong. If she's injured to the point where they need to fundamentally change how they use her, fans deserve to know that. If she's healthy and they're just choosing to minimize her role, that's even worse. The media strategy is equally troubling. Stephanie White chose to do a major interview about the team's offensive philosophy with a media personality who has built a platform on criticizing Caitlin Clark. That's not an accident. That's a message. The Fever are signaling that they're aligned with the faction of WNBA media and fans who resent Clark's popularity and the attention she's brought to the league. This is where we need to talk about the broader implications. The WNBA just signed a massive media rights deal, based largely on the surge in interest that Caitlin Clark generated. The ratings for Fever games last season were historic. The attendance was unprecedented. The merchandise sales broke records. That's what convinced networks to invest hundreds of millions of dollars in the league. But those networks aren't paying for potential. They're paying for performance. And if the ratings decline because the Fever are mismanaging their biggest star, there are consequences. Media rights deals have performance clauses. Advertisers have expectations. If the viewership numbers don't match the projections, money gets clawed back. Future negotiations get complicated. The entire economic foundation of the league's growth becomes unstable. The empty seats at their recent home loss aren't just embarrassing. They're a warning sign. The Fever had a waitlist for season tickets last year. They were selling out consistently. Now resellers can't move inventory. That's not a minor dip. That's a fundamental shift in demand. And it's happening because fans can see what's going on. They can see their favorite player being marginalized. They can see the franchise making decisions that don't make basketball sense. What makes this particularly frustrating is that Herb Simon, the owner, is 91 years old. He's not making these day-to-day decisions. Whoever is running basketball operations on his behalf is actively destroying the value of the most marketable player the franchise has ever had. Any competent owner would recognize what Caitlin Clark represents financially and build everything around maximizing that value. You'd create an organizational structure designed to showcase her talents. You'd make roster moves that complement her game. You'd hire coaches who understand how to feature her effectively. Instead, the Fever are doing the opposite. They're treating her like a complementary piece who needs to adapt to everyone else. They're making roster decisions that ignore their biggest needs. They're implementing systems that minimize her impact. And they're doing all of this while the attention she generates is literally funding the league's growth. This isn't just bad for the Fever. This is bad for the WNBA. Because if the league's biggest star gets mismanaged to the point where casual fans stop watching, the entire economic model collapses. The networks lose interest. The advertisers pull back. The expansion plans get delayed. Everything that seemed possible a year ago becomes uncertain again. So here's the question every Fever fan needs to be asking. What's the actual plan here? Because from the outside, it looks like organizational chaos. It looks like a front office that either doesn't understand what they have or is actively trying to diminish it. And neither of those explanations is acceptable for a franchise that just experienced the most successful season in its history. The Stockton-Malone comparison that Stephanie White made isn't just a catchy reference, it's a blueprint. Those two players ran the same play for 15 years and became the most successful pick-and-roll combination in NBA history. Not because defenses couldn't figure it out, but because the execution was so good that knowing what was coming didn't matter. That's what Clark and Boston could become. That's the potential that's being wasted right now. And if the Fever continue down this path, if they keep making decisions that prioritize everything except maximizing Caitlin Clark's impact, they're going to wake up one day and realize they've squandered something irreplaceable. Because players like this don't come around often. Talents that transcend the sport and bring mainstream attention are rare. And when you have one, you build around them. You don't try to fit them into someone else's system. The real tragedy here is that this was all preventable. The blueprint was obvious. The path to success was clear. All the Fever had to do was continue developing what was already working and add the pieces they obviously needed. Instead, they've created confusion, frustrated their fan base, and put their biggest asset in a position where she's not being utilized effectively.